Howdy, I wanted to talk about Quantum Witch. This is a game, if you're a fan of old school games from back in the day of like the NES sort of era, and you like a late RPG with narrative choices, then this game is for you. I think you'll like this game. You know, going back and playing a bunch of games that have that retro feel, it's the hot thing right now. A lot of indie developers like doing it, especially because it's a little bit easier to make, but there's always that nostalgia for that. And it's one of those things that I don't think it's ever gonna go away. Playing games that remind you of the NES or SNES or even, you know, Sega's products as well. This game, though, to me, felt like it was a game from back then. So when I played some of these retro style games in the past, it's a fun little experience. It's like, oh, it kind of reminds me of a game played back in the day, and it feels kind of, I don't want to say like fan made in like a negative way, but it does feel like, oh, it's a game that's been made now that's supposed to look like this older game. There's so many games that are like that, and a lot of them are good, but there's just so many of them out there. And this was one of the few times where I felt like I was playing a game that was made in that era when it came out. The exception being, though, that there's a lot of fourth wall breaking, and that's what's interesting about this game. There's fourth wall breaking with the character that you're playing. Other characters in the game, there's one point where a character was like talking to me as a player for a second, just out of left field, and there's a lot of adult humor in it. So in the terms of like what the dialogue is, it's modern, but somehow the aura of the game and the way it plays and all that feels very of that old school time, which is something that I haven't really gotten from other games of its type. It's a weird description. Maybe it's just a me that's affecting this way, but it felt like I was playing an old school sort of game, and it just kind of brought that joy into it. And then it had a little flair as well. This is a game that, you know, it looks like any old kid could play. I don't know if a kid should play this game. I feel like this is definitely a game meant for adults in terms of it covering some sexual content without necessarily explicitly saying it, but a lot of hints, a lot of inside jokes and that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't recommend it for like the youth necessarily. Teenagers to adults probably is the range you're looking for this game. I played it on PC and Steam, ran super well. I was able to use my controller, and it, you know, even though it had the old school vibe, it felt like it worked with controls pretty well. You have these several maps in the game. There's like basically one hub map that goes across several screens, but then there's warp points so you can warp to other different parts of the map. But it's like one straightforward map from left to right. And you're playing this character that has to go kind of gather these sheep of sorts that got lost, and then by doing that you fall into something else that's happening, and then next thing you know you're going into like portal dimensions and stuff like that. It takes a drastic turn, but what was interesting about it is that as you're going, there are a lot of narrative choices. The game provides you several opportunities to make a choice, and I definitely got the vibe that this is a game I could play several times over and have a slightly different outcome each time. And I played it all the way through only once, and the ending I got was very interesting, to say the least. And I'm curious to see if I picked this other choice I picked earlier, what route that would go, because the game itself isn't that long actually if you play it a certain way. The game length of this is gonna vary depending on the choices you make, I think, where you're gonna get some playthroughs that are a little bit longer and then some that are shorter. Mine was like about an hour, I would say 45 minutes to an hour taking my time with it. But I can see if I made a certain other choice here or there, it could be maybe even 30 minutes or like another half hour longer. And yeah, you know, the humor, it's a little silly and dumb, but it works okay. There is no voiceover to this game. Again, it's that classic game of just like you kind of hear the text and all that. The music's kind of cool. I like the changes in music as you go from scene to scene. There is not a whole lot of combat, at least with the playthrough I had. There was definitely a setup tutorial to have combat that I did, like a training of sorts. But at least in my playthrough, I never really got the chance to use a weapon of sorts, even though I was sort of trained in one. All I ever did really was do a lot of platforming and just a tiny bit of puzzle solving, but that was about it. So maybe there's another playthrough of this where you do actually get to fight someone or something a little bit more. I'd be curious to see how that goes. But I'm glad I was reached out to on this one from the people who were making the game, and I'm glad they did, because off the top of my head, if I had just seen this initially on my own, I don't know if I would have given this game much of a shot per se, just because I usually don't do retro style games, and most importantly, I'm just really bad at them. I'm really bad at like old school platformers. And it's not that I don't enjoy those games. I like watching speedruns of them, but I'm just so bad, and I was going into this thinking I'm not gonna be able to finish this probably. But I did, because there was some action and all that to it, but it still was more narrative based. And it felt good to kind of get through a game that looked in this style, because I've rarely ever done it playing games through my whole life. So it was kind of cool to be able to say, hey, I finished one of these retro looking games, even though it was a newer game. So I would recommend checking this game out. It is very old school vibe, but very modern in terms of its dialogue. The relationships of the characters is also very modern. It's very pro LGBTQ. So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking this game out. I had fun playing it. It's short, you can play through it multiple times, and I think you will appreciate it if you're a fan of old school retro style games.